Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect.
Separation and dismemberment are tools of the oppressor. To be sacred is to make holy. To be sacred is to make whole. To be whole is to include everything, to leave nothing or no one out. To be whole is to include what we deny. To be whole is to include what we have separated ourselves from. To be whole is to allow the shadows within ourselves, within our communities, and within our country come into the light. I am sacred. My value cannot be ranked in a hierarchy or compared to the value of another human being. My worth does not have to be earned, acquired, or proven. I am valuable simply because I am alive. I know this more than I know anything. But this is not what I have been told. This is not what I have been told. I have been told that my value is determined by a power and authority that exists outside of me. My body knows value. My body knows connection. And yet I have been sold, my consciousness has been sold into a belief of separation. I bleed like this. You are sacred. Your value cannot be ranked in a hierarchy or compared to the value of another human being. Your worth does not have to be earned, acquired, or proven. You are valuable simply because you are alive. You know this more than you know anything. Yet this is not what you have been told. You have been told that your value is determined by a power and an authority that exists outside of you. Your body knows value. Your body knows connection. And yet your consciousness has been born into a belief of separation. You bleed like this. We are sacred. Our value cannot be ranked in a hierarchy or compared to the value of another, an other. Our worth does not have to be earned, acquired, or proven. We are valuable simply because we are alive. We know this. We know this more than we know anything. Together, we are value. Together, we are connection. Together, we cannot be sold into a belief of separation. Together, we can dismantle and unravel our structures of separation and oppression. We heal like this. I am here to remember what has been dismembered. I am here to connect to what I have been separated from, who I have been separated from. I am on a sacred, 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 sacred journey. I am on a journey back to wholeness. What journey are you on? So I'm Samantha, I'm Sam Wallen with Right in Power. And what I just shared with you is my individual truth. It is my why for absolutely everything I do. It's my why for why I write, it's my why for my life, it's my why for my business, and it's my why for being up here on this stage here today to talk to you about white privilege as a white woman. And to be clear, I'm talking to other white people. And I invite the people of color in the room, and I'm not just talking black people, I'm talking the range of the different identifications of race that have been put into the category of other. And I invite you to stay and engage and to help bear witness to this work that we white folks must do. So I'll be talking about power and privilege and where our individual truth meets our collective truth. And we've been talking about magic a lot, and I'm going to throw in another definition of magic. So magic is the art of changing consciousness at will. It is the art of invoking power from within you. It is the art of liberation that ruptures the fabric of our belief. And magic happens when our individual truth meets our collective truth. Our collective truth is that we live in a society that values white people over people of color and gives them power through laws, social practices, and institutions designed to maintain white superiority. This structure is called racism. And racism is not just individual acts of discrimination and prejudice. So often that's what we hear, and that's where people get caught, that racism is just that KKK member or that alt-right member or that Trump supporter or my Uncle Stosh who likes to use the N-word. Like, that's not me. But racism is systemic, and it's structural, and it's institutional, and it's embedded into every aspect of our lives. Those individual acts are simply prejudice. But racism is prejudice plus power. And that prejudice plus power created these collective truths. As Darla was mentioning, this country was founded on genocide and slavery. Our collective truth is that Jim Crow laws enforced segregation, condoned lynching, forbade interracial marriage, and denied voting rights. And there are many aspects of those elements that are still practiced and on law in different states today. Our collective truth is the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Our collective truth is the Chinese Immigration Act of 1882, which essentially barred all Chinese people from coming into this country and didn't allow the ones that were even here to become citizens or naturalized for another 61 years until 1943. Our collective truth is that the federal government practiced redlining after World War II, which basically denied money for housing and homes to people of color. This created the inner city ghetto and the suburbs. And then when people of color moved out of those suburbs and out of the city and into suburbs, then that created white flight. And white flight was white people leaving communities and taking all the resources, the education, the tax base, all of that with them, and including the ability to accumulate wealth over generations. Our collective truth is police brutality. Our collective truth is that more black men are in prison today than there were slaves before the Civil War. Our collective truth is that people of color are killed at a rate 2.5 times higher than whites by police. These structures shape our consciousness. And they shape our consciousness because they shape and impact our lives. So I want you to just take a breath for a moment and just breathe into what does it feel like to have that, our collective truths, just land. What comes up for you? What is it like to be with that feeling? And how might these truths have shaped your own consciousness? Maybe another breath. Let it out. So these structures and systems of separation also give me white privilege. What is privilege? Privilege is an unearned social advantage through no merit of your own. It just comes with you when you enter this world and has nothing to do with what you think, what you feel, or what you believe. And white privilege is that unearned social advantage simply because you happen to be born white in this country. If you have never had a defining moment where your skin color alone has made people devalue or hate you, and they have power behind it with laws and social advantages and economic disadvantages to reinforce that devaluing and that hatred, then you have white privilege. So I want to tell a story here about how I had a moment, a magic moment. Again, magic happens when our individual truths meet our collective truth. And I had a moment where my individual truth met my collective truth and my consciousness broke open and was ruptured. And it has to do with the hula hoop. And this story is important because, for two reasons. One, it was through understanding my lack of privilege, a moment where my consciousness broke open and really understood how my own consciousness was shaped by my lack of male privilege. So that's one important aspect of this story. And the second important aspect is by having that experience, it also opened me up to be able to understand my own privilege. So, about 15 years ago, I went to a music festival in East Troy, Wisconsin. And it was an outdoor 3-day music festival. And it was a beautiful day, it was sunny, and I was really enjoying myself. And I had just been learning how to hula hoop. Some of you know I like to hula hoop. And I couldn't bring it with me on the airplane, and I was really bummed because I wanted to have this experience of being able to hula hoop to live music. And so I was wandering around the crowd, and I basically came across someone with a hula hoop, and I was delighted. and asked if I could use it. And they said yes. And so I kind of found a spot that was a little tucked off to the side under an oak tree, grounding under the oak tree. And I began to hula hoop. And I was uncomfortable at first. And then I closed my eyes and I let myself go. I let myself move and dance and be in the music without restraint, without holding back. It was a moment of pure freedom and pure, there's the mic, pure expression. It was a moment where I was sacred and I was whole. And then the music came to an end, and I stopped hula hooping, and I opened my eyes, and about 10 feet from me was a man, a white man. And he was leaning in toward me like this. And like everything about him was coming at me, his eyes, his body, everything. And he said, "Can you do that again?" And in that moment, I went, and my whole body shut back down. And the first thought that went through my mind was like, "Oh, you fucked up. You messed up. You let yourself go. And now you're gonna like have to pay for it or answer for it." And I don't remember what I said to him. I know I set the hula hoop back down, and I don't know if I responded or not, but when I walked away, what I realized was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like what happened was when I shut myself back down, I came back to what is a state of normal. Like my consciousness realized that shutting back down, I shut back down to normal, of how much I had to like withhold myself on a day-to-day basis to just be in the world and feel safe. And I got to see that because I left it for a minute. And it was devastating. And the other thing I realized is that it didn't matter what he thought or what he felt, or if he was there to take advantage of me, or if he was there to just like worship me as a goddess. I might have like really played into that actually at some point and been like, oh, I'm gonna get my validation from you. It didn't actually matter. What mattered was that his mere presence carried with it a history that lived in the space between us. His mere presence carried with it what I knew, and my individual truth was that there's danger there, that men have power to take something from me if they want to, even just a moment of my own self-expression. And in his consciousness, he was completely unaware. I'm sure he had no idea the impact of what happened for me all in those few seconds that he asked me, "Can you do that again?" So what mattered was that his individual truth, and that individual truth for him was shaped by male privilege, and he had no idea. And I'm sure he actually felt something, though. I'm sure he felt something had happened and probably had no sense or idea what it was. So, fast forward a couple months, and I'm in my very first diversity training seminar. I'm working as an admission counselor for Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. It's a room full of white women, admission counselors, and another magic moment happened. Another moment where my consciousness got broken open, where my individual truth met our collective truth. And in the first way that happened was that I was being asked to look at racism in a way that I'd never looked at it before, and that was to look at it in terms of how does it benefit me? Who does it benefit? How does it benefit me as a white person versus the way that I had always conceptualized and thought about racism as, oh, that's something that affects people of color. That's something that victimizes people of color. Like, it broke open my mind to be like, oh, wait, yeah, who benefits from that? We don't look at that side. We're rarely asked to look at that side. And so I was being asked to look at that side, and of course, as white folks tend to do, I raised my hand and was like, yeah, but I don't feel privileged. I'm a woman. I experienced sexism. I grew up on food stamps. Like, I don't feel like I have privilege. And I was pressed to go a little further and dig a little deeper and say, well, okay, might you consider what this means to you to be a white person? And I had a moment where, again, that consciousness broke open, and I realized I was the hula hoop guy. I realized that my mere presence carries with it a history and all kinds of living truths that come with that history that I was completely unaware of. And that it's my work to deal with that. And so being willing to see that, to being willing to have my consciousness broken open by my kind of individual truth and where it met this collective truth of white supremacy in this country, I was able to begin to move toward understanding, like, what is white privilege and what are my white privileges? And there are many, and I forget them. And I have a hard time seeing them and getting it and wrapping my mind around them. And I'm just going to share a few with you here today, just to name some of that and put them in the room. So, a few of my white privileges are that I get to stand here on this stage and wear whatever I want, and pretty much say what I want, and not have it be considered a sole representation of my race. I can make mistakes and mess up and not be considered a sole representation of my race. I have never been asked to speak for my entire race. If I am rejected for a job or a loan or a house, I can pretty much be confident that it didn't have anything to do with my race. In fact, I had an experience once applying for a refinance on a home loan with Wells Fargo. And on the phone, I answered all the questions. And at the end, the guy said, oh, wait, one last question. You're white, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, we should be all set then. Wow. That is white privilege. I have never had anyone assume that I don't speak English or it isn't my first language just by looking at me. I can look around me in this room, on television, on books, in movies, in my history book that I was taught in school, and see my race widely represented and reflected back to me. And not only that, it's reflected back to me with a narrative that says, you made it what it is today. You made the world what it is. That's white privilege. So, another collective breath. Just notice what's here for you, what's coming up. Might any of this be true for you? And what is it like to step closer toward that and acknowledging that? And are there any others that might be coming up that I didn't name? That's a hard one, because privilege, we are conditioned to not see privilege. It's just the air, it's just like normal, it's just like my life. Well, of course I can get up here and do whatever I want, and yeah. It's the air we breathe So it's really hard to see it and to put our attention around it and our consciousness toward it. Okay, another breath. So the question that comes is, what do we do about it? Anybody have that question? Okay. It's a tough question. And I'm just going to share a few things that are at the forefront for me here today because I only have a limited time. But the first and foremost thing is obviously acknowledging it as I've been speaking to. But from there, the first and most important thing always is we have to feel it and we have to grieve it. The root of the word grief literally means oppression, to weigh upon us. Racism weighs upon us. It weighs upon all of us. Like, we avoid talking about race because there's so much emotion involved. We get triggered. We just don't even want to go there. And we don't want to go there, and we get triggered because of emotion, like whether it's anger, defensiveness, denial, guilt. It's a big one for us white folks, like guilt. But underneath the guilt and underneath all of those feelings actually is grief. No one in this room, no one anywhere wants to be seen as an incomplete representation of our collective truth. We're all about it here. Each one of us wants to be seen as our individual, whole, complete, representative selves. Right? But the truth is, and this is a hard one for us white folks, racism was created by white people. It originated and is perpetuated through white communities and white families. It is not just a problem for people of color. In fact, the reason it's a problem for people of color and the way it polices and damages people of color is because it controls our consciousness and our reality of white people first. It's the way our consciousness is controlled and shaped by a power and authority outside of us. And I love to separate myself from the Trump supporter or the racist or be the good white liberal. But the truth is we are all in the same delusional boat. And that's painful to claim. And the truth is, racism costs white people. It's not to say, this is not in comparison in any way to the damage and the victimization that happens for people of color through racism. And we all have a sense of that. But what are the costs of racism to white people? That question is just rarely ever asked. And in fact, as I was putting this talk together, I knew it was this is the heart. And every time I went to work on it, is my mind fucking shut down. I literally shut down, and it was I couldn't track, I couldn't think. It was like trying to pick up sand and carry it. But I know it to be true. And this is a question that we have to be asking ourselves. It's critical. And there are many costs, but I'm just going to share one with you today. Racism severs our heads from our hearts. Racism offends and appalls my soul. Like we wonder about why, it's hard to feel and express. Well, this is part of it. What grieves me most is looking and seeing the damage that racism has done and the ways that it continues to be perpetuated. And this happens because of emotional removal and separation. In her book, Born to Belonging, Mab Segrist writes, "Necessary to the slave system was the master's blocked sensation of its pain." And she goes on to say, the metaphysics of genocide are that people don't need to respond to what they can pretend they do not know. And they do not know what they cannot feel. So a friend once told me that grief is unexpressed love. And I always really loved that definition because it felt true. Like it felt true when I've lost something or someone. It was like all the love that I didn't express for that thing pained me. So our grief is our unexpressed love. Our grief is our unexpressed humanity. Racism costs us our humanity. It costs us our wholeness. It costs us connection. It costs us our ability to be fully expressive and alive and here connected with each other. Collective breath. Feel the roots back into the ground from the top, our oak tree. Okay. So badass transformational leadership is leadership for change, not the status quo. And if I have learned anything in the last couple years through Darla and Chris and other coaches in this room and in this community, is that if you do not feel the pain of your current situation more than your fear to change it, you will never make lasting change. So we have to feel the pain of racism as white people. Because if we don't, we are not going to jump into that fire. We're not going to, as Angela was saying, like that fire of courage, like we're not going to find that fire of courage to jump in and be burned or to face a gun being pointed at us as we stand with our brothers and sisters for solidarity and for protection of life. We aren't going to do that until we are in it for our own freedom. This is about our freedom too. There's a woman named Lila Watson who's an Aboriginal activist, and she has a quote that I love and I love to share that says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together." My liberation is bound up in the liberation of others, of people of color. And their liberation is bound up in mine. Your liberation is bound up in the liberation of people of color, and theirs is bound up in yours. And a deep understanding of white privilege is profoundly rewarding. This is my friend, social justice teacher and activist Victor Lewis says this, and I agree. And it's deeply rewarding because, well, I'm going to go back here. You get to experience a more complete, whole picture of who you are in the world and what you carry with you when you enter a room. You get to deepen your intimacy and connection and honesty in all of your relationships and get to make new ones with people not like you. You become a more reliable and effective leader because you're able to navigate the complexity of these structures that shape us and shape our consciousness. You feel and you model how to be uncomfortable, or how to be comfortable being uncomfortable because you are willing to go there. You're willing to risk and have the hard conversation. And you awaken and call forth that power from within you to find your own unique way of responding to this. Your own form of authentic activism, because this isn't just about going out on the weekend and doing a march or whatever, like that might be part of it. This is about changing the way of being and your own consciousness in your life every day for your lifetime. So I have a call to action that I want to close with here. Oops, wrong way. And my call to action is here and now and in this room, the rest of this today, the rest of our day today, when you leave this retreat and you go back into your lives and your communities and your business, I ask you to take this conversation with you for yourself, to stay in this conversation because it is a privilege to leave it. People of color cannot leave this conversation. And conversate means to turn with. So I invite you to turn with this within yourselves and within others. And by asking yourself and exploring these questions. How do I, as a white person, benefit from racism and white privilege? What does racism cost me? What do I need to grieve? And what will that make possible? And I'll also just mention that I do have my free gift I created is a little more extensive. It's called Unraveling Racism Starter Kit that has like 7 practices to be building into your life and experience around this. So if you want that, you can check the box on my email list. So in closing, I just want to say that only when we know how we have been shaped by the structures of power and separation within which we live, can we really become shapers. I am on a sacred journey back to wholeness by understanding, feeling, and consciously working to unravel my white privilege. Will you join me on that journey? Thank you.